why is Jesus so angry? We're not used to seeing Jesus angry. But here he is in this passage doing things that are shocking, radical. Why is Jesus so angry? He comes into the temple and he's hoping to find people worshiping God. But what he finds instead is a whole lot of commercialism. There, in the Jewish temple system, before you would come in to make your sacrifice, you had to buy these animals, the sheep and the cattle and the doves, and you bought these in order to make your sacrifice in the temple. The problem is that the money changers would be there and they would charge exorbitant prices for these animals. Knowing that the Jewish people had to have these things in order to make their sacrifice, they jacked up the price and took advantage of all of these people. It would be like coming to church, and instead of coming in and seeing people worshiping God, you would walk in and find the mall. If you would come in and you'd see people selling things to you, like commercials set up all around the fellowship hall downstairs. Buy this in order to get closer to God. Buy this product. Buy this product. Make money. Sell things. Buy things. So it becomes a marketplace. Jesus is very angry about this because God's house is supposed to be free from people taking advantage of others. And just the opposite is happening. Why is Jesus so angry? Because he is angry that they are breaking the first 3 commandments. The first 3 commandments are, you shall have no other gods. The second one is, you shall not take God's name in vain. And the third one is, honor the Sabbath, keep it holy. Everything that is going on in that temple is breaking those commandments. They're not honoring God. They're only there, the people who are doing the selling, to make money, to profit from people's worship. And they're doing it in God's name, which defiles the name of God. People come to the temple knowing that people are going to take advantage of them, so they may even be hesitant to want to come to worship God because somebody is trying to sell something to them, hawk something to them. And on this Sabbath day, when they're supposed to be free of making money, free of working and trying to capitalize on the needs of others, the exact opposite is happening. It's like the marketplace, the mall, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, and it's happening right there in their temple. Now, we are not used to seeing Jesus being angry. Our pictures of Jesus are ones that have him looking beatifically out into the distance with a calm and serene look on his face. Go downstairs in the fellowship hall, you'll see that picture, that famous picture of Jesus right next to the kitchen. Or we like to think of Jesus, the little baby in the manger, soft and innocent. Or we like to see Jesus being with children, smiling, laughing, or having compassion and healing people. But we sometimes forget that Jesus got angry, especially when he knew that the system was taking advantage of people who were trying to worship God. So why is Jesus angry? He's angry because he does not want to see people being taken advantage of. Now this has a lot of implications for us in the church today, especially on 2 different levels. First of all, it means something for our church and for all churches. In our congregation, we should be a place that is free from commercialism. one of the things that our council is discussing is how to make our church free from the marketplace. Remember, Jesus said, do not turn our church into our marketplace. So, for example, we're thinking about how do we raise funds in our church? Are we letting companies that make products and sell them to us to then sell to others? Is that feeding into the commercial system? Or are we instead making things ourselves, like a turkey waffle dinner, doing the work with our own hands and raising the money that way? Is the marketplace using the church to make money for itself? That's one aspect. And the other aspect is, do people come to church just to make money off of others? Do members solicit business from each other when they should be worshiping God? How can we make it so that when people come to church, they don't have to worry about somebody trying to sell them something or gain business? The church should be a place where we come to worship God and God alone. So we're going to be talking about that in our council meeting. But there's another level where this commandment of Jesus to worship only God comes into play. And that is where church and religion intersects with politics. Because it's not just about the Jewish people and their leaders trying to take advantage of those who are worshiping. It also has to do with the Roman imperial system that is over everything. The Romans were the ones who were in power. And they looked at the Jewish temple system as a way for them to gain even more power for themselves. So those money changers were not just making money for themselves, they were making money for the larger Roman system. And I can tell you, when Jesus went in there and he made that whip of cords and he's driving out the animals and he's taking the money box and he's flipping it over and all the money spills everywhere and he takes the tables and he turns them over, it got some people's attention. And it got some people's attention that made them mad. Because Jesus is threatening the whole imperial system that is set up in that day and time. The Jewish leaders are upset, but even more importantly, the Roman leaders are upset. And from that point on, they're watching Jesus because he is threatening their money-making system. He's threatening their power. This is an instance where Jesus gets involved with politics. Now, in our country, we keep a distance between church and state. But we have to remember that there are times when Jesus directly interacted with politicians, directly interacted in the political system to effect a change, to speak out against injustice, to speak up for those most vulnerable. And this is one of those instances. When you think about Jesus confronting the powers in public places, this has implications for us in the church as well. When is it appropriate for people of faith to step into the public square and make a comment on the way the marketplace works or the way politics is being played out? When is it appropriate to speak up for those who are being taken advantage of? In our society, we can see many instances where the marketplace and the imperial system is taking advantage of people who are trying to not only worship God, but also just to live their lives. When it says Jesus was filled with zeal for his Father's house, one way we can expand that is to say that God's house is not just a church, but is in fact the entire creation. The whole earth is God's temple. And how are the human systems taking advantage of God's creation to simply make a profit for themselves? How are companies exploiting the water and the air and the land? When you see how our global corporations have bought and sold politicians, just like happened in the time of Jesus, and they have desecrated God's house, well, it can make you angry. Perhaps even angry enough to speak out and confront the powers, expose the toxic secrets, as Jesus was doing, and to speak in a very public way to try to bring some truth to light about the situation. So when you see your pastor's face on the newspaper, and people ask you, why does your pastor look so angry? You might remind them that the church has a long history of speaking out to protect those most vulnerable. That Jesus himself got angry, as we saw in this passage. That Christians speak out and they defend the weak and the vulnerable. The early Christian martyrs were always calling to task the Roman leaders. The abolitionists were calling to task the leaders about slavery. The civil rights movement was all about the church confronting an unequal system between blacks and whites. Zeal for God's house, the whole earth, fills me. One of the roles of the church, and especially the clergy, is to stand with Jesus in the public places where politics and religion intersect, and to call both the secular and the sacred realm into accountability, to remind them that these commandments are sacred, whether you are a person of faith or not. These are sacred commandments. And when they're just tossed to the side, or they're flipped around and manipulated in order for the profit of a few at the expense of God's creation and God's people, then it may be time to overturn some tables and pour out the money boxes. It may be time to release those animals, God's creatures, from bondage. The second role is to remind the powers that they have been put on notice. Try as you might to destroy the temple, Jesus says, and in 3 days it will be raised again. Now they're thinking of their whole system, which has taken not just 46 years, but really hundreds of years to create. And they're saying, how dare you question these systems that we have in place? How dare you question our political system or our economic system? And Jesus says, you have been put on notice that the real power is in God's hands. And no matter what you try to do to desecrate people and God's creation, God will always stand on the side of those most vulnerable and lift them up in 3 days. We are reminded that Jesus compels us to ask ourselves, at what point do I say enough? At what point do I allow my passion and my faith to fire me up to the point where I am willing to take a risk and speak out against oppression and speak up for those most vulnerable and join my voice to the voice of the chorus of Christians who are inspired by Christ to call out for justice? I invite you during this Lenten season to ask yourself those questions, to step out in faith and in courage into the public places, maybe around the water cooler at work, maybe in the lunchroom, Maybe at the line at the supermarket. Maybe at the turkey waffle dinner where I heard some political discussions going on. I invite you to think about what it might look like to perhaps knock on the door of one of your local legislators, or write a letter to the editor, or sign a petition, or call a local radio show to speak out about an issue. Some of us may even be called to follow Jesus into those public places and take direct action in a way that confronts the powers in order to effect change. And like Jesus, we may find that the powers will be angry with us, and we will even risk retaliation. But we are Christians. This is part of what we have been called to do, because it's what Jesus did. We do this in the name of Jesus. We are bold. We have courage. And we let zeal for God's house empower us to speak up, to speak out, and to proclaim